With this, we finally have all the context needed for the third book specials, which is the most relevant for the topic of this video. And I want to make clear that the specials as an allegory for being neurodivergent or for being bisexual or trans breaks down at the fact that they are super soldiers. While in real life, if you have any of these identities, you are much more likely to be a victim of violence than a person of the majority. But this is a common problem in quite a lot of science fiction allegories. Now Tally is a villain protagonist. As we finally have the view from the inside in how they work, it becomes apparent that specials aren't actually brainwashed drones like you would expect. It is more like that the way their brains work and already beforehand existing mental illnesses and the way they process their senses are all so carefully tweaked that the only conclusion they can reach is being on the side of the city. In my opinion, this is a lot scarier. The way Tally describes her own body and her own thought process are strangely mechanical, more like talking about a machine. And most of her arc over this book will be fighting her own brain and fighting to gain her humanity back. You can probably see why I would find this relatable. Through the cyclical storytelling, this book too begins with Tally crushing a party along with Shay's unit, because they have heard that one of the Smokies would turn up there and distribute Maddie's newer, safer cure, so that these kids can bring it to the pretties on the other side of the river. Tally and Shay are absolutely gleeful for having the chance to hunt down their ex-boyfriend David. It's such a fun dynamic to see these two monster girls more or less flirt with each other over how they will capture this guy. Absolute evil girlfriends vibe. Suddenly, contact to one of the others breaks off, and Tally and Shay have to realize that the Smokies have military technology they could have only gotten out of one of the cities. They have sneak suits that make them invisible even to the infrared that the specials use to navigate at night. And they have shock arrows that are strong enough to knock them out. Shay rushes off to free the other soldier and manages, but gets knocked out herself as she's distracted by helping him. Now David tries to escape, carrying her with him on his hoverboard. Tally catches up to him. They now shoot at her from two different directions, but since she's warned, she heard it and manages to catch both arrows, right while David is watching. He is visibly disturbed by her. She has nothing but hate for him, and quickly he realizes that he doesn't have a chance of escaping this, unless he throws still unconscious Shay into the river underneath them. Isn't even a choice. Tally jumps into the river and saves her. Already from the beginning, the queer subtext is stronger than in the other books. It's not just Tally and Shay's relationship. Both of them are described in typically male terms, like how angular they are and how intense their faces look, their strength and how dangerous they are. And both of them feel more at home in their body than they ever did before. It feels like a metaphor for finally becoming strong enough to be able to look queer. Especially with this detail that special circumstances is exempt from the limitation the morphologic committee puts on everybody else's faces and bodies. None of the male specials are really important, but they too are described in rather androgynous ways. Sure, they are dangerous, but for them the focus is more on how fast and elegant they are. The movie didn't really manage to bring the specials across, so this aspect is also missing, but even movie Paris, who ends up as a special, wears eyeliner. What I find even more fascinating is how it also works as a metaphor for unmasking. Tally finally accepts that she's different, and Shay, who had accepted that since the very beginning, finally gains power from that. But this sense of being, well, special directly is used to exploit them further. They're not just special and free, they see the world in all its detail and they see how much better they are than the average citizen, and so feel the need to protect all of them and so protect the system. They're special because they are so selfless that they allow becoming just a weapon and not a person anymore. It is not the usual kind of oppression you see in YA dystopian novels. And sadly, this is all too true to reality. While governments are usually not quite as open about this yet, I have seen so many hate groups who won some disenfranchised younger people over by claiming how special they are. And this is also visible in how Shay's unit's self-harm problem, if anything, got worse through becoming specials. It's part of their group identity. It is a completely normal part of their life, and they use their scars to brag to civilians. As super soldiers, specials are expected to get badly injured and expected to be able to continue fighting, which got them the brain modification that pain for them can bring them in an almost tranquil state of concentrating on the fight. Can you see how this negatively affects their self-harm issues? And, well, it absolutely makes sense in-universe, given how much they glorify it and how Dr. Cable exploits them through that. But Shay's unit call themselves Cutters, and I will only be using Shay's unit because I'm really not comfortable calling them that. The story continues with Tally convincing Shay to visit Zane, who she still somewhat cares about. However, she feels herself as so different and better than him that she can barely bear to look at him. This is made even worse by the brain damage from the cure, mostly manifesting as causing him issues with motor control, so he can only walk or hoverboard if he really concentrates on it, and even more that his hands are constantly shaking. He still tries to trick the city and help his new friends in a new clique, but this time the interface cuff is around his neck and he can't get it off by himself. So Tally decides that she has to help him with this, and she has to somehow help him to prove himself is worthy of becoming a special too. Shay has the idea to break into the city's armory, and they indeed find a tool they can use to cut through the cuff, but they also level half of the building in the process. Zane and his new friends have contact to the Smokies and also have precision finders, and they give one of these to Shay's unit. Tally is uneasy to leave him outside like this and suggests that she will follow his group as a backup for the rest of Shay's unit, who will just use the position finder for themselves. This opens old wounds for Shay. She sees Tally prioritizing Zane over her once again, and she knows that this time Tally's reason for doing that have a completely valid, rational excuse. So she shouts that the only thing about Tally that stayed consistent through all surgeries is how selfish she is, and then flies off. I felt that so hard in my soul. No matter what, no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I change or how much I grow, my relationships don't work out. On a larger scale, this shows the interplay between body and brain and identity these books explore. Each of the books has a different person as the main character and slightly different narration styles, but all of them are also very recognizable the same person. The only other book I ever saw pulling this off is the Locked Tomb series, which goes a bit further with this concept. For the next days, Tally follows the group and tries to tell herself that this was the right decision. With only the utter incompetence of the group at being in the wilderness, she then has to fix without being seen as distraction. During 2 of these moments, Zane ends up seeing her. The first time, she sedates him so fast that he isn't even sure if this was not just maybe a dream. But the second time, he addresses her directly. He's worried about the self-harm scars and about how much she's changed and how willing she is to side with Dr. Cable and the city. She tries to convince him that she is still herself and they are still a team like when they were pretties, not particularly successful. He tells her that she can still change herself. Finally, they kiss and then push their hands under their clothes, and he starts taking off Tally's sneak suit. This is the closest these books come to an explicit sex scene. And looking at the side guys, I love how not moralized at all it is. There's something so bittersweet about Telly thinking how good it is to finally not have this distance between her and someone else again, and to finally feel human again. There's also a moment where she notices how he reacts to her being so much physically stronger than him. Then she feels his hands tremble, and suddenly all of her programmed-in superiority is back, and she's automatically disgusted by how uncoordinated he is, and how emaciated and dirty and weak. And her automatic reaction injures him. Not bad, but there's still blood. So she flees and makes sure that for the rest of the journey, he and the others will not see her again. She feels something heartbreaking and wants to cry, but she just can't. She doesn't even know if she's just emotionally stunted or if specials genuinely aren't able to cry anymore. Apart from how heartbreaking this is also another interesting moment, considering that the specials and even more Shay's unit are definitely described as being seriously mentally ill. One would expect that this makes them compassionate for people with physical disabilities, but it very much doesn't. I saw these kinds of intercommunity issues between neurodivergent people and physically disabled people so often in real life too. While it isn't really explored much further, it is still nice to see something like this portrayed. This scene also shows how in this book, Telly is the one who is stronger and more dominant and more dangerous in relation to both David and Zane. In the other books, her romance with them was not exactly as annoying and unnecessary as the most negative examples of this genre would say, but they were also relatively traditional in terms of roles, and far from the most interesting thing about these books. Now she is the dangerous, furious ex. Her lover still has some kind of positive feelings in relation to David. And her sexuality is dangerous in relation to Zane, not because of any purity expectations, but because she's so much stronger and uncontrolled, and an involuntary movement could injure or even kill him. In other words, she takes the role that usually a male character would have. Finally, the group arrives. And Telly finds herself not looking at another wooden village, but a whole other city has joined the smoke. First time reading, I didn't saw this coming at all, but rereading, it is already hinted at in the very first book. The moment about Telly's city, which I will call CTAG from now on, for easy distinguishing, even though her city is never named in the first 3 books and in the sequels only hinted at being named CTAG, being a hardliner. Telly being carried part of the way by rangers from some undescribed other city. The city is called Diego, and they have dropped all restrictions on all kinds of body modifications, and they're taking in refugees from all the other cities around them. To her surprise, Telly meets Fausto on the panorama platform as she explores the city. He looks unharmed, and he seems free since none of the Smokies are nearby. He then explains that, just like Telly for the pretty surgery, he consented to let himself be captured and be turned into a special so that Maddie could try out a new cure on him. He doesn't have his ruthlessness and superiority complex anymore, but also not his overwhelming emotions and so the need of trying to stop them by self-harm. For Telly, this seems like forcefully removing a part of himself, and she wants to leave. Suddenly, Smokies do start to arrive, and with them people of Shay's unit, and all of them try to inject Telly with the cure. She managed to fight her way through, but the only way out is jumping off the panorama platform. She doesn't wear a bungee jacket which would distribute the force of the fall evenly over her whole body. She just wears these wristbands for hoverboarding that are meant to stop a fall from maybe a meter or so. This means the full force of her 80-meter fall only lands on her arms. It rips both of her shoulder joints out of the sockets. And this is where we first see just how extreme the pain responses of specials is altered. because she doesn't faint. She runs over to the nearby park and even manages to climb a tree with her completely injured broken arms, and only faints as she slips and falls directly on her injury. Because of the length escalating like this, I decided to add another background colorizing recording, this time of Dr. Cable and Maddie kissing. They're the dystopian dictator and dystopian rebel leader, respectively, so anything between them after a certain point would be hard to justify in canon, and I ran with this and gave all of this a dreamlike atmosphere. It only fits the topic of the video in so far that Dr. Cable is a cyborg, but I just didn't have any other recording. She reacts with her repair nanos having almost healed her arms again, but stuck in Diego's psych ward's padded cell. Over the loudspeakers, a psychologist tries to explain to her that she's an illegal weapon, and that they know how they could remove her body modifications and treat her altered brain with psychotherapy. She's explicitly labeled as mentally ill, so nobody can claim that the neurodivergent reading of this is not canonical. To be fair, it is not labeled as one specific mental illness, but for me this works just fine because the special surgery altered her brain so extremely that it doesn't really make sense to talk about this in our culture's terms. And also, these books work better if you see them as an allegory instead of a realistic depiction of how a oppressive future could be. Tally reacts by ripping through the padding and trying to punch through the wall under that until her knuckles bleed. This makes the psychologist panic because she feels that they put something in the air trying to sedate her. She's barely affected at a point where a normal person would be already unconscious, so they pump in more and more, and finally she starts to become dizzy. She sees something pop up in her eye screen and instinctively tries to answer. The doctors are horrified, with one even calling, "What is she?" What, not who, not what did they do to her? They want to remove all her body modifications, which apparently is safe enough that they think it's okay to do that without her consent. In the last second, Shay fights her way through the hospital staff and rescues her. Tally thinks that everything will be good now, until Shay is disturbed about Tally's brutality in fighting with one of the guards, and realizes that Shay has also taken the cure. Tally expects her to, trying to force it on her. She doesn't. She finally breaks their cycle of Shay being altered and Tally then being forced to follow. Their moment of finally being at peace with each other comes to an end by an alarm. CTAC is sending war drones towards Diego and they will arrive any moment. So Tally and Shay and the rest of Shay's unit try to fight them as best as they can. Diego, like almost all of the cities, doesn't have a military or even real weapons, because why should they? There wasn't a single war since 300 years. It is such a gut punch. And Westerfield brings across how extreme and how alien this feels for the people of this world, because they all thought they were better than this by now. That humanity had overcome war and oppression and poverty and environmental destruction, that their utopian world was perfect and would last forever. And this is a message of these books. I am sad at how many people don't seem to notice it. This question of, is humanity able to progress, and should humanity be allowed to be free? Given how a cyborg manifesto describes the cyborg not just as the organism merged with technology, but also all of these nets of relationships and information across societies, this does fit into the topic too. It is also such a chilling character moment for Dr. Cable. Before that, all the violence she inflicted was very punctual. In fact, the specials are specifically designed to not use weapons so that they can focus on the one person or a small group that is a danger to the system and not have any collateral damage and not need wars like our society. This is the first time she just kills people in an unpersonal, completely automated way, completely at random. She surgically altered herself, her body and mind, more and more extreme, cutting away more and more of her humanity to prevent humanity from destroying itself again. And now she has become what she wanted to fight. Do you see what I mean when I say that this is not a character arc a woman would usually get? For our standards, there are relatively little victims, only 17. But for these people, there being any victim at all was unthinkable before this day. Telly is called to the hospital. Zane had a treatment for his brain damage, but his body rejected the new tissue, and because of the attack, all of the doctors were busy and didn't notice. And now he's brain dead, and they want to ask Telly if they can shut down the machines so that they can use the bed for someone else. All her enhanced senses only show her even more how wrong he looks. She agrees. This is another moment where she wants to cry but can't. So all of these emotions are stuck inside her. I am a bit torn about killing Zane off. On one hand, it is so refreshing to see a male character get fridged for the female main character's development. But it also means killing off a physically disabled, anorexic boy who fought so hard to get out of the system and be free and be able to be himself. But something about how utterly pointless his death is and how something like this doesn't really seem to fit in these kind of optimistic books really brings home that the old system is dead now. Telly wants to fly back to SeaTac and try to convince Dr. Cable to stop the war. Dr. Cable's justification for starting it is attributing the destruction of the armory to Diego, and Telly hopes that if she can prove that it wasn't Diego but her and Shay, it would force her to stop. She knows she will likely be killed, or her brain and body will be altered even more extremely, and she knows that Shay will go with her. So she sneaks away at night alone. She packs one cure for spare in case she might need that in an unforeseen moment. And apparently it doesn't look recognizable as a syringe and is easy enough to transport. Telly leaving Shay behind, not because she prioritizes someone else over her or got distracted by another relationship, but to save her. What shows vividly in just how bad of a mental state she is that she flies non-stop without sleeping, because the special's brain modification also makes them able to do that, on 2 hoverboards in the absolute maximum velocity they can have, until one of it overheats and explodes and she can jump onto the other only in the last possible moment. And she doesn't really react to that. She doesn't care that she almost died. She doesn't care that this could happen with the other hoverboard too. She definitely comes across as passively suicidal. Very close to SeaTac, in the old ruins, she meets David again. He is so much nicer than I would have been in that situation. He forgives her and talks about her finally wanting to stop cutting. She explains her plan. There's such a connection and tenderness, but it doesn't feel romantic at all, and I love that. Telly arrives at Special Circumstances, and one of Dr. Cable's subordinates promises her to lead her to the room with the city council and a big audience alongside Dr. Cable. Instead, it's just Dr. Cable and a few underlings in an empty conference room with all the wires cut. Dr. Cable knew that Telly and Shay were responsible for destroying the armory, but SeaTac and several other cities had issues with Diego since years because of how lax Diego was interpreting the guidelines of the Morphologic Committee, And since the cities are self-sufficient, sanctions didn't work at all to change anything about that. Dr. Cable decided the destroyed armory was a good excuse to start with harsher measures against Diego and even have the other cities on her side. Tally is shocked but quickly comes up with another plan. She pretends to be a spy for Diego and having additional body modifications that makes Diego able to see inside special circumstances and pretends the cure is actually an antenna to send all of that out. Naturally, Dr. Cable tries to grab it and Tally, to make this look real, fights back. After a bit of shuffling, Dr. Cable manages to grab the antenna/cure, but rams the pointy bit into her thumb long enough for the nanos to get into her bloodstream. To destroy evidence and distract, Tally stamps the syringe into pieces and then jumps and kicks Dr. Cable in the stomach. I honestly cheered as I first read this. This is so satisfying. Well, for about 20 seconds, because it doesn't take Dr. Cable and the others longer to have Tally unconscious on the floor. Tally is now stuck in the room alone without any entertainment or even possibility to see what is happening outside for days and days. It sounds paradoxical, but one part of the self-harm representation that really doesn't work is that she does not fall back in this time, because this is the worst she's ever been in her life, and showing that would explain the gravitas by showing how difficult it is to get rid of such self-destructive behaviors. But also, if we want to make this realistic, this is a young woman who is very, very mentally ill, self-harms, and stuck alone in a room without entertainment, which is classified as torture. So showing this in all the psychological intensity this would have in real life would definitely be way too dark for young adult books. Dr. Cable occasionally visits her and talks with her, but she can't really gather much information at first. Then Dr. Cable slips through that thanks to what the defected unit talks. Some people in the other cities and even in CTEC City Council start to get a bit wary. Gradually, she shows more and more self-doubt and is increasingly lesser willing to push some extreme measure through. And she talks more and more openly about how CTEC's situation with Diego is going. There's something so darkly fascinating in how, at this point, Dr. Cable and Tally have completely ruined each other's lives, but they are also the only people they can truly be open with. Until finally, Dr. Cable has a mental breakdown about being kicked out by the democratically elected city council of CTEC for being too brutal. I would not call this a mental breakdown for any other character. In fact, for other characters, this would just be being mildly frustrated. But for Dr. Cable, who was always so cold and elegant and completely in control, to pace back and forth and ruffle through her hair and whine about how people talk about her creations and how could this happen because her new prototype was so perfect and nobody is appreciating her, is jarring. And I think that this was the moment I first truly understood her character. Because it shows how extreme what she did to become the leader of special circumstances and protect her city truly was. She was not naturally this ruthless, sadistic super soldier and mad scientist. She deliberately altered her own brain to become that because she thought this was necessary for the greater good. Somehow that is more disturbing. And now she is not able to function without that. Now we understand that there isn't anything about Dr. Cable's private life or private relationships with other people or in the book even her first name. Not because she's a flat, badly written character, but because her power relies on not being a person, but this terrifying weapon protecting CTEC. Connection and private life are quite likely weaknesses for her, so she just doesn't have any life outside of special circumstances. I can understand that Dr. Cable is a difficult character to get, because the narrative doesn't directly explains all these things. They are just hinted at, and you have to be willing and capable to spin them further to truly understand her and truly enjoy her character. And I wish they would, because she is such a fascinating villain, and I would love to see more people explore that. At some point, someone switches the electronic devices in Tally's room back on, and she sees the way people write on the internet and speak in reports change as Maddie's cure is distributed in the cities. More and more media also showing Diego's side of things and showing interviews with Shay's unit. Even later, C-Tech caves in and promises to disband Special Circumstances. Every one of them will have their brain and body modifications removed and be made into an ordinary citizen. Tally realizes that she doesn't want to lose her scars. She is terrified of the day she will be dragged out and forced to become another person she didn't choose herself. As the day comes, she hears a voice she can't quite identify, telling her that she will be saved, but that she needs to pretend that she is not conscious anymore, just like back then in the hospital in Diego. However, they don't save her on the way to the surgical room, and not even as they put her into the tank and fill in the liquid with the nanos that will keep her body alive when they take it apart. And not even as they start moving the surgical instruments. She is completely conscious and she tries to get out of the surgical tank, but it is completely sealed. This is far from the first time Scott Westerfield uses something I can only describe as medical body horror, even alone in this series. Citizens know every detail about the surgery, and so all of it, every disturbing, gory moment, is described or at least mentioned. Just alone, the average surgery contains things like filing down all facial bones and replacing them with moldable plastic and skinning the person to then put new, smoother skin on them after the surgery is finished. But this moment is definitely the most intense of it. It drives home the theme of bodily autonomy too, in a way. Finally, she's freed. And it's not Shay, it's Dr. Cable. She seemed to have fought her way through, according to a small injury in her face, and she looks incredibly exhausted. She accepts that she lost, but she wants Tally as the last truly surviving of her creations to protect the good parts of the old system, which Tally agrees to. I love how it's not either lose and be reintegrated in the oppressive system or completely burn it down, but this third way. As Tally stands on the roof of the building, ready to flee into the wilderness, she feels something on her face and takes a moment to understand that finally she's able to cry. And I'm going to be honest, I cry every single time at reading this part. She meets David again and sends her manifesto out into the world. Telling it like that, it sounds romantic and as if David is the one of the love triangle who wins, but it doesn't come across as romantic. I love that this ends with her not ending up with any of the boys. I'm not sure if this is because I only read this book as the fourth book was already out, but it also doesn't really feel like Shay and Tally would never see each other again, but more like them taking a break from each other to heal so that they can finally have a healthy relationship. I can't even really describe how much it means to me that Tally in the end chooses to not get cured and stay herself and heal on her own terms. Of course, truly accepting myself is much more complicated and still will take years. But this showed that staying myself is even something that is possible, that is allowed. In a way, it is a narrative about the autism cure, despite it never really being mentioned in which way Tally and Shay even originally were neurodivergent, but since it is an allegory, it still works for me. And it's so cruel to say that this is glorifying self-harm, or not like other girls' story, or mock Tally becoming a special because, ooh, I'm so special, I'm such a Mary Sue. When this is a story about two neurodivergent, possibly queer girls trying to break out of the systems that harm them, but getting instrumentalized against each other again and again. And as they finally accept that they are different, even that is used to weaponize them. It's just so strange to me how many of these people don't seem to be able to even comprehend that there truly are girls and women who are not like the majority, and that writing stories about them accepting that is not putting them above everybody else. That their only concept of being different seems to be pretending you are better in a way you haven't earned. I won't tell the plot of the sequel books 2, and I don't need to because they don't really fit into the topic anyway. They all have other point of view characters, but Tally and Shay appear again 2 times. First is 3 years after the revolution in Extras, which funnily enough predicted cloud culture. David and Fausto are with them too, and they still come across as quite traumatized and quite unhinged, but are also seen on page at working on their relationship. The other one is 20 years later in the last book of the Imposters series, Young Bloods. Now it's Tally and Shay and 2 side characters from the first book. Tally explains that she tried another romantic relationship with David, but ultimately it didn't work out because he couldn't deal with just how unstable she was. And she also says that now Shay has David's role. They are sadly still not canonically together, but they feel very married. They're still noticeably mentally ill, and especially Tally is still quite unhinged and ruthless. But you can also see that they learned how to live with this at this point, and that they have a good life. And they even come across as wise at some points. It's so refreshingly realistic that they take this much time to mend their relationship, and also this much time to heal and learn how to live with their mental illness, and that they are even still mentally ill 20 years in the future, and it not just magically went away. There was something so healing about seeing this character I related so much to as a teenager, and now I'm an adult and be able to see her as an adult too. That it is possible for someone like that to have a future and to be loved. I also think that the ambiguity of Tally and Shay's relationship and alliances is fitting to the ambiguity of being bisexual, and also the ambiguity of being a cyborg. Challenging binaries as a cyborg can also be read as an allegory for being non-binary, and Tally and Shay fit into that too. I already described this androgynous way they are written about and of their roles in the story, which isn't a true confirmation but creates these non-binary vibes. I'm not even the only person thinking like this. I saw someone on Twitter write about how it would fit really well to Tally to use its pronouns as a reclaiming of the dehumanization, and I can totally see this. I also saw Tally and Shay in specials are gender goals, which they absolutely are. They were that even as I first read this and didn't have the words yet. Something that surprised me about the Cyborg Manifesto was not just describing the cyborg as being a link between machine and human, but also being a link between animal and human. The specials are described as being more animal than human, mostly with linking them to wolves. They have this animalistic danger and animalistic strength, and they are also more machine than woman, but they are never human. I saw people treat queer people like this too, as being animalistic and also unnatural at the same time, but I saw this even more with disability, including with how people talk about my autism. And another detail I want to point out in terms of unnatural being bad, I like that the specials having these extremely extensive body modifications is not treated as the source of them being evil, which could be used in a transphobic way or in an ableist way. They are like this because of deliberate brain modification, and the reason this doesn't come across as ableist to neurodivergent people for me is that even that wouldn't work without all the cultural indoctrination. And because, at least in parts, they seem to deliberately target mentally ill people to exploit them for the system. I don't know, this was such a foundational text for developing my feminist views and my neurodivergent advocacy views, even if the queer subtext flew over my head as a young teen.